This story is from my great-grandfather, who is currently at the ripe old age of 101. He's told this story at family gatherings for years. He's from the city of Yaroslava in Russia. I guess it was the Soviet Union when he was born there. Being from the USSR, of course, he served under the Soviet Union during World War II, then fleeing to the United States a few years after to escape communism. He told me this story again recently. It had been not long after the Battle of Illichilluki, which wasn't a major battle of the war, but it still ended up in a large amount of Soviet and German bloodshed, as most battles at the time did. It was the evening, and according to my great-grandfather, it was very cold that night, like hellishly cold. They were in a small house/building that was one of the few with no damage to it, which made it nice because it was warm. He and his comrades were celebrating with drinks, songs, laughing, and joking, what you could imagine a celebration would look like. At some point in the evening, two fellow soldiers walked into the building. My great-grandfather and his friend Sergei didn't care for these two. It was apparently because they were loudmouths and were just unpleasant guys. Sergei asked my great-grandfather if he wanted to go out and have a smoke. He agreed, and the two put on their heavy coats and walked out into the freezing cold air. My great-grandfather pulled out a cigarette, as did Sergei, and then he lit both of their cigarettes. They were talking for a while, both enjoying their cigarette and basking in the glory that came along with winning the battle that had been going on for about 2 months. After my great-grandfather finished a cigarette, they were both about to go back inside when they heard what sounded like a man screaming from the woods in the distance. Fearing that it was the scream from one of their comrades, possibly being attacked by a patrol of pissed-off Germans, they went back inside quickly and grabbed their guns because of the fact that there might be armed Germans. They got a bunch more of their fellow soldiers to run into the woods with them. My great-grandpa mentioned that as he got deeper into the woods, he started to get a weird feeling, like dread and fear. When they couldn't hear screaming anymore, my great-grandpa suggested that they all split into duos and search for whoever it was. Sergei went with him, while the others went off in their own duos. After about 2 minutes of walking through the dark, cold woodlands, my great-grandpa said that he could hear faint crying, like someone was in pain. Sergei heard this too, so they walked to where they heard the crying sounds. They started seeing drops of blood in the snow, so they both began to take the situation as more of a threat than they were earlier. It still gives me chills when my great-grandpa tells me this part. When him and Sergei got to the source of the crying sound, they had found the most bizarre and disturbing scene they had witnessed. 2 German soldiers on the ground, one of them dead, one alive. One of them had their uniforms ripped and bloodied. The alive one was cowering by a tree, muttering stuff in German. He didn't notice my great-grandpa and Sergei right away. My great-grandpa then walked towards the other body. The corpse was horrifically mutilated, missing limbs, skin ripped off the face, his uniform was shredded, and it looked like he had been scalped. Another thing that stood out to my great-grandpa was the smell. He couldn't describe the smell, saying it wasn't like a dead body but more like chemicals. The corpse looked fresh. Sergei investigated the living soldier who then, noticing Sergei, jumped back in terror, as if he had been traumatized. He was shouting stuff in German. It was only then that my great-grandpa noticed that his leg had been torn apart, and his chest was bloody. He said he could remember that German screaming something like "Das Colas" or something similar. Sergei pulled out his pistol and put the German out of his misery with a single shot to the head. Almost immediately after this, my great-grandpa described hearing moaning-like noises. That's when a very tall thing started running in the darkness away from them. Afraid, Sergei and my great-grandpa started shooting erratically in the direction of the thing. The other men ran over, but the thing was gone. All the men were reprimanded when they got back to the village, but a report was sent to the high command. It was never investigated further. My great-grandpa claims that it was the most terrifying experience of his life, makes him stressed when thinking back on the sight of that mangled German and that thing.